So there I was, just enjoying the fact that the Marvels had just bombed so enormously, which is something a lot of people had warned Disney and Marvel Studios and Kevin Feige. This might not be the best plan of action. The success of Captain Marvel was absolutely astroturf. It was right there in the middle of the two biggest superhero movies of all time. They decided to put out the sequel. They throw a couple of characters no one really cared about. It blew up in their faces, and as I was enjoying it, and I will admit I did enjoy it because I did think it was absolutely hilarious that Kevin Feige thought he could just throw so many bad ideas into one movie and people would slop it up because it said MCU. I didn't realize, I wasn't thinking big picture, that actually the Marvels was doing us an enormous favor. Now, obviously, they cannot save us from Brie Larson as Captain Marvel, the most wooden, robotic performance in the history of superhero movies. We will never get that time and money invested in anything associated with Brie Larson back, but Brie Larson and company on the Marvels did save us from an even worse fate than Captain Marvel 3. That would be the Young Avengers, which they had clearly been leading up to and kind of setting the table for in the MCU, likely to never happen, with the OG Avengers bowing out, not to mention the introduction of a teenage Cassie Lang. Endgame seemed to promise that the Young Avengers were right around the corner. Sure enough, Phase 4 proceeded to throw in various team members from the comics like Tommy and Billy in WandaVision, and America Chavez in Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. And then, at long last, moves were made to finally assemble the MCU's Young Avengers in the Marvels, which concluded with an Iron Man spoofing scene in which Iman Vellani's Miss Marvel recruited Haley Steinfeld's Kate Bishop into her Kid Avengers initiative. And that is a moment that probably should live in infamy as far as the movie histories, because it did not portend good things. Young Avengers never really worked at Marvel Comics because it was the time when they decided to replace all the cool Avengers, all the OG Avengers, all the established characters with younger, more diverse versions of the characters, not because they were more interesting or they could tell better stories, simply because they were younger and more diverse than the original characters. And basically, it was a nauseating time at Marvel Comics. It was not a golden era, to say the least, when we started replacing characters like Iron Man out with Ironheart, who you may remember from Black Panther, when they replaced Hawkeye with another character called Kate Bishop Hawkeye in the Hawkeye series on Disney+. There are things that I dislike in comic books, and there's things that I really hate, and that Matt Fraction series, which has good art, is one of the worst things I've ever read in my life. Of course, they replaced Bruce Banner the Hulk with Amadeus Cho, totally awesome Bros of Hulk, who we have not seen in the MCU yet. Thankfully, glad we haven't seen that one yet. We also get Stinger. You may remember seeing Cassie Lang introduced, I guess, in the first Ant-Man movie when she was really cute, and then she was still pretty cool in Ant-Man and the Wasp, but when you got to Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania, she was completely and entirely insufferable. You just kind of hated the character. They used to have a character called America, replaced her with a character called America Chavez, written by Gabby Rivera. That was a bad idea. Got to see her also introduced in the Doctor Strange sequel. Oh man, there's just been so many of these awful derivative versions of these heroes that were simply brought in to be younger, more diverse versions of them. And they thought they were going to make that into a movie franchise. And now there's one casting and one portrayal that I do think has worked so far really well, and that would be Haley Steinfeld as Kate Bishop Hawkeye. Admittedly, I despise the character in the comic book. She's so off-putting. She's so terribly written by Matt Fraction, and then it continues on later on after he leaves the series, that I never wanted to see the character in the MCU. But Haley Steinfeld and the people behind the Hawkeye series were able to take some of the rough edges off the character and make her pretty darn likable. So I don't hate that character. In fact, I guess I don't hate Miss Marvel, who obviously is replacing Carol Danvers, the original Miss Marvel. Maybe you didn't remember that one. The Kamala Khan Miss Marvel in comic books is insufferable, but Iman Vellani as Miss Marvel is adorable. I do have to admit that one. But basically all the other castings and all the other portrayals of those characters throughout the Marvel Cinematic Universe so far have been so off-putting that there was never, ever, in the history of the world, any chance that Young Avengers was going to work, but they certainly were pushing through with it. We got the end credit scene in the Marvels for a reason. That thing was a warning. It was not supposed to be a celebration, and thankfully, a little thing happened along the way. It looked like the Young Avengers were happening, and then the Marvels flopped hard. Depending on how Marvel interprets its financial failure, the Marvels could potentially lead studio execs to believe these next-gen heroes just don't have enough pull to be such a major driving force of the franchise in the years to come. Let's take a look at the facts. 2023 kicks off with Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, prominently featuring Catherine Newton's Cassie, which only makes a middling $471 million and earns MCU worst reviews ever. 2023 then ends with the Marvels earning MCU worst box office and middling reviews, and it just happens to prominently feature yet another Young Avenger, Kamala Khan. And that was the problem almost from the get-go, especially in Marvel Comics, is that it was just a girl power team. And there's a place for girl power teams and girl power and all that kind of stuff. As replacements for the real heroes, it never really works. And obviously that's what they were going to have to do in the MCU. I think a lot of people like Barbie for a reason, because that character and that toy is like literally weaved into the fabric of young women's like childhoods and becoming adolescents and all that kind of stuff all over Western society. And making a movie to celebrate Barbie makes a whole lot of sense, where most little girls don't grow up reading Marvel and DC superhero comic books. I'm not saying they don't read comic books, but they certainly aren't reading the Hulk. They're probably not reading a lot of Batman. Generally speaking, girls don't so much grow up with superheroes being a prominent part of their lives, where certainly boys do with action figures, cartoons, comic books, and all that kind of stuff. So they were going to go hard in the paint on girl power. And in 2023 and 2024 and basically the last 5 years or whatever, that is an enormous red flag, because Hollywood doesn't know how to do that with traditional properties that are aimed at boys. They just kind of try to make boys' properties into girls' properties. It ends up turning everyone off, including the girls, and it never really works. In fact, I will say this. If they came up to me, Kevin Feige says, Wes, I would like to get Young Avengers off the ground. We do need to keep Iman Vellani in here. We do need to keep Haley Steinfeld on the team. We would like to keep the young lady that played Cassie Lang. We would like to keep the kid that played Elijah Bradley in the Falcon and the Winter Soldier show, and the two little kids that were in WandaVision that played like the new Quicksilver and all that kind of stuff. We would like to keep them, but we have a problem. How do we make this work? There's one way to make it work, and his name would be Miles Morales, which then causes a problem because Marvel Studios, Disney, do not own the rights to the character Miles Morales. He's the one character that's in that age range that actually has enough clout and awareness around him as a Marvel Comics hero, you know, the replacement Spider-Man, to actually lead a team like this and perhaps give people a reason or give them enough incentive to go and try out the Young Avengers and believe that Kevin Feige won't do what Kevin Feige and Marvel Studios have done for the last 2 or 3 years or so with the m-sheu. Unfortunately, Miles is blowing up. Well, I guess fortunately, but unfortunately for Marvel Studios, he is blowing up. There's more awareness around Miles as Spider-Man than ever before, but they've also got a Sony cinematic universe that's going to have the third chapter coming out soon. I think we're going to get a Spider-Gwen, a shoot off, another Miles Morales movie, and then like a Spider-Geddon or something like that. So they got a bunch of stuff over there. They are not handing Miles Morales back to Marvel Studios. And without Miles Morales as the lead teenage hero for your Young Avengers, this thing was never going to work. It's a pipe dream. It's something that I believe a lot of people at Disney would like to make happen, but it is just not meant to be. And I guess while I was laughing and enjoying the not success of the Marvels and just how badly it performed, but we should have been celebrating the Marvels, because that was likely the death of us getting any Young Avengers movies with any of these terrible actresses, besides Haley Steinfeld and Iman Vellani, who are lovely, and these terrible interpretations of the characters on the big screen. So Brie Larson, you did us all a solid. You ruined the franchise. You made it toxic, and perhaps you let Marvel Studios know, do not invest in all these stupid girl characters that are just replacement for boy characters, because they have no history, they have no stories, and essentially they have no cachet with viewers or whatever. Finally, they state, it's worth noting that a Young Avengers project has never been formally announced, but evidently assembling the group somewhere was a top priority by Marvel. If the team is coming anywhere, it will most likely be the small screen rather than the big one. And yet, it's not as if things are going smoothly over on Disney Plus either, as Marvel is in the midst of totally restructuring its approach to streaming series. So even a Young Avengers TV series cannot be guaranteed. Now, obviously, that does throw the extra wrinkle on there, because there are other outlets besides movie theaters to get your Young Avengers fix, or more obscure Marvel characters that we would like in the MCU, but really can't headline a movie or whatever. But even then, Miss Marvel is the lowest viewed MCU show ever on Disney Plus, and it's by a quite a large margin, despite there being some really bad Disney Plus projects like A Secret Invasion and Echo. It doesn't appear that there's a large, unquenchable thirst for teenage drama shows about superheroes on Disney Plus featuring young, diverse replacement characters for Marvel's traditional heroes. It doesn't appear that that is actually there. Could you get them all together and call it a super team and maybe get it to work? I don't really think so. But we do have Ironheart supposedly still coming out on Disney Plus. I think they also have plans for an America Chavez show. And if there is a long-term home and we actually get some of this crapola associated with Young Avengers and the MCU, it likely will be on Disney Plus. And really, if it's going to have a home, I guess that would be the place that makes the most sense, because you do have to control these budgets. They need to be a lot smaller, especially if you have a team of like 6 teenage girls. There's not going to be a lot of interest. You can't have huge special effects. You can't have big time villains. You know, it needs to be like the Babysitter Club and then like the throw-in dude that's completely miserable being there. And then you probably find an audience. You can probably keep your budget intact. You cannot put this stuff on the big screen. The people have spoken. Kevin Feige, Marvel Studio, have basically destroyed, burned it to the ground, any goodwill that MCU fans had for them after Endgame. It's basically just been a dumpster fire after that, with the exceptions of Spider-Man No Way Home and really Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. And yeah, just, you know, the MCU on Disney Plus stuff, it seemed like there was some potential there, but it has not come to fruition. It's basically been just as bad as the movies, if not worse, kind of overall. But that would be the place to put the Young Avengers. But thankfully, Brie Larson had the good sense to destroy the Marvels movie, featuring the first Young Avengers character like in a starring role, and is probably doomed the franchise for at least half a decade, hopefully for a full decade, because nobody wants to see these stupid versions of the characters. Let's just get to the reboot and get the real heroes back in the MCU and tell some new stories, because this stuff is going nowhere fast. I do want to give Brie Larson the old tip of the cap for saving us from that one, and I do want to invite you guys to go check out the Patreon. We have a lot more content, whether it be pop culture, comic book, lots of good stuff like that, a Q&A with Doc as well. Over 8 hours of new content every single week on the Patreon. Over 30 hours of new content every single month on the Patreon. Lots of different ways that you can support Thinking Critical on Patreon and get lots of cool new content that you're not seeing over here on the YouTubes. And I definitely invite you to check that out. There's a link in the video description.